Hi everybody. So for my final project, I did environmental health in the agricultural industry. So to begin, the description is the science or practice of farming is called agriculture. This includes, but is not limited to, the cultivation of soil for the growing of crops and raising animals to provide food, wool, raw materials, and other products. So here in Kentucky, the history of agriculture goes as far back as the 1770s. Raising livestock and crop continues to be the backbone of rural Kentucky today. There are a wide range of agricultural production, um, but is not limited to this list. But some of the top agricultural production here in Kentucky includes beef cattle, corn, tobacco, horses, soybeans, hay, and wheat. Lexington, Kentucky is actually known as the horse capital of the world, and Kentucky is the leading beef cattle state east of the Mississippi River, with more than 1 million beef cows as of January 1, 2015. And also, Kentucky is the leading producer of horses overall in the entire United States and number one producer of thoroughbreds. So, um, agriculture is very rich here in Kentucky. So for this project, the top threats I wanted to focus on were pesticide chemical exposure, mental health, UV exposure, animal and vector exposure, and equipment safety. So some studies document that farmers and those in related industries are at a higher risk for the development of cancer of the stomach, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and chronic diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's are also being studied in relation to agricultural chemicals. Um, the possible neurotoxicity of pesticides emphasize the need to promote the safe use of chemicals. So another area for health promotion programs is disabling injuries and traumatic deaths. Farm accidents are very important because of their frequent occurrence among young people, um, along with the elderly population at disturbing fatality rates. Other issues of concern in these industries include skin diseases, hearing loss, and stress. So to begin with, pesticide and chemical exposure, it's a very common health threat that is associated with agriculture. So there are different chemicals used, but one in particular, the chlorotrizine herbicide, is used in the United States for over 35 years. Some of the things they control are weeds and some grasses, primarily used in corn production, um, but these pesticides are also used on citrus, nuts, sugarcane, sorghum, and cotton. So, in terms of total weight used over the past 30 years, atrazine is one of the two most used pesticides in the United States, and in Kentucky, 1 million or more pounds of atrazine are applied annually. So, this is a very heavily used pesticide, and it's important that we understand the adverse health effects. There is an increased interest in exposure to pesticides and the relation to cancer. In particular, breast cancer is associated with organochlorinated insecticides. Um, there has been studies conducted to examine the effects of this chemical on the initiation of breast cancer. There was actually a study completed in Kentucky that analyzed this risk. So with that being said, going along with pesticides, there's also been studies that evaluate the exposure of pesticides to an increased risk of depression. So, different pesticides can have various effects. However, there is an organophosphate that are among the most commonly used and most acute pesticides. They evoke consistent patterns of physical symptoms, but also have acute psychological and neurobehavioral effects such as anxiety, depression, and cognitive impairments. There has been a study of 251 suicide cases that was undertaken to explore the possible um, relationship between high suicide rates in intensive agriculture area and the population at risk, which is mainly the farmers that were exposed to the pesticides. And these results did show that there was a great relation between the two. So, mental health, not only is it associated with the exposure to chemicals, can it be detrimental, but mental health can also affect farmers in different ways. So farming is a very stressful environment. It is work that requires 24/7 attention. A common stressor is finances and the environment for this community. A common stressor is also the risk of disease in rural areas who don't have feasible access to healthcare, which can greatly affect one's mental state. With the increased rates of depression, this can lead to an increased rate of suicide. Suicide rates for both men and women are higher in rural areas, and 87% of mental health professional shortages were in these rural communities. So that's a very big risk here for that population. Next is exposure to UV rays. So farmers spend a majority of their time outside, so it's important that we understand the education on how to properly protect yourself from the sun. It's very important to understand that non-melanoma skin cancer is very common and costly cancer in the agriculture populations. Next is animal and vector exposure. So proper sanitation and handling of the food is very important for the safety of not only the workers but the consumers. So nevertheless, agricultural workers and food handlers are potential vectors of foodborne illnesses when handling food items in the course. So it's important that we understand that diseases can spread quickly through unmonitored food handling, and we should take the proper steps to ensure the safety of both the workers and the community. Next is proper equipment. So equipment safety is very important because there are incidences that occur that do not get reported that can hold a great impact on injuries in the agriculture industry. Agriculture is actually ranked along with mining and construction among the 3 most hazardous industries. So it is a job that requires around-the-clock work. So frequently there is work in home environments that overlap, and that will expose adults and children to these occupationally related injuries and sometimes death. So there are 4 leading causes of unintentional work-related deaths for farmers, and that includes machinery, motor vehicles, falling objects, and electricity. It is also agricultural machinery is also a leading cause of non-fatal injury, accounting for approximately 18% of all work-related injury in farming. Another interesting find is not only do injuries and deaths occur from farm equipment, but there is a great risk with motor vehicles. So fatalities related to motor vehicles include not only automobile and truck crashes, but farm tractors and other farm equipments involved in crashes on public roadways. So one study actually found that as many as 10% of all tractor-related deaths in agriculture occur on public roadways. And for risk assessments, so to begin with, we have discussed the potential hazards and risk associated with these threats. From there, we will discuss the activity steps, and then we will discuss the risk ratings. So understanding the rate of the risk, so on a scale of, we'll use 1 to 5, understands how great the impact is on the community and the farmers. Next, we will discover risk control measures, and then we will discuss the person responsible, and then we will all do this all and complete it in a good time frame. And the 4 concepts of risk assessment are hazard identification, dose response assessment, risk characterization, and exposure assessment. And here I wanted to provide an example of a sample risk assessment that would be used for these farmers. It can kind of show how the different threats can be monitored and handled in a proper manner, so that way we can ensure safety for the farmers and the community. methods. So farmers have to find ways of dealing with risk and protecting themselves from decisions taken today without knowing what might happen tomorrow. Like I said earlier, farming is a very unpredictable environment. Weather plays a large role in this. Um, Sometimes there are a year's worth of work that could be wiped away with just a terrible storm. So there are different unknowns that come with farming. Risk management strategies are used to reduce the chance of a bad outcome occurring. So farmers who try to manage risk should follow these sequence of steps. First, they need to identify the possible sources of risk, which we have. Then we will realize the possible outcomes, both the good and the bad, decide on alternative strategies available. We will assess the consequences of each possible outcome, and then there we will set goals and objectives for the risk management. So the main aspects of risk management are to anticipate that an unfavorable event may occur and act where it is possible to reduce the chances of it happening. So taking actions that will reduce the adverse consequences should the unfavorable event occur is important. Good risk assessment management decisions depend on accurate information, which in turn requires reliable data. Good information is also one of the most useful assets a farmer can have to help make rational risk management decisions. The different steps of risk management begin with formulating the problem, defining the risk management objectives, identify and evaluate risk management options, risk management decision. We will implement the decision, develop environmental indicators. From there, we will then monitor environmental and public health improvement. Okay, and communication strategy. So the first step would be to ensure all stakeholders have a clear knowledge or understanding of the project requirements. So to begin with, the farmers and their agents some examples of stakeholders like landowners, farm workers, unions, farmers associations are all victims of exposure. They can also play a role in risk management and reduction. So they can also be potential victims, beneficiaries of risk response. So an example would be a loss of income. Some more examples of stakeholders are agricultural suppliers and services. Some of these examples include seed suppliers, pesticide manufacturers, fertilizer manufacturers, transport companies. They will all play a role in risk management and reduction and could also be potential victims and beneficiaries of risk response as well. Next, another stakeholder would be food distributors and processors. So examples of that are food wholesalers and retailers, transport companies. They can be potential victims as well as beneficiaries of risk response as well. Next, national, regional health protection agencies will be stakeholders. So things such as public health institutions, food standard agencies, occupational and health safety agencies, local regional health boards, and environmental health departments will all play a role in risk management and regulation along with risk communication. Lastly, another important stakeholder is the rural residents that could be victims of exposure. These individuals need to be aware of their surroundings and their environment so that they can ensure safety for themselves and their families. Local media will play a large part in risk communication, so things such as TV ads, radio ads, and newspaper ads are very useful tools for these rural communities to get word out of these different risk management strategies. So from there, we will create a risk response team. A risk response team will consist of national and regional health protection agencies, as well as environmental protection agencies. With this team in place, we will develop and formalize project management roles. Then we will adopt better scheduling standards for technical work. And then lastly, we will define and evaluate quality standards throughout the project's lifestyle to ensure the safety of the farmers and the community of the environment. And here are my references, and there are the rest of my references. Thank you all.